Washington, as well as in prison. So we're very happy to have her on board, and she's going to be a great resource for everyone in Manitou Springs.
Any other comments? Whitney, would you like to say something?
Oh.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
The only thing I really wanted to say was, how dare you not let me sneak away without saying it. I am very excited to be here, part of the Manitou Springs and part of PPLD. Especially exciting time given what's on the agenda today. And I hope that if anybody in the room has any questions at any time, you are free to come seek me out at the library. And we will attempt to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and welcome to Manitou Springs.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments? Okay, let's move on then. We have the consent calendar.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to pull one item off the consent calendar, which is item number 3 for discussion.
That's the approval of the January 14th work session minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Are they in there?
As well as item number 1.
Okay, and Mr. Shader requests that we take item number 1, the 2020 Mineral Springs Joint Funded Monitoring Agreement, USGS, off the consent calendar. Bob, do you have to approve that?
Yes.
Okay.
Move both be separately discussed.
Okay. So we went up the consent calendar down to one item, approval of the January 7th meeting minutes. Wait a second. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote to amend the consent calendar so we just have a second item on there. Vote. All right, so now we need to approve that one item. There's a motion to approve.
I move we approve the minutes, regular meeting minutes from January 7th on the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I need to abstain, I haven't reviewed.
Big part?
I need to abstain because I have not reviewed
Oh,
those
okay.
minutes.
I just had one thing on the minutes. It was under L.
Future, okay, yeah, under, sorry, let me find it. L, future agendas, page 22. The third one down, that should read February 4th, 2020.
Okay. Move to amend that.
Move to amend that to read February 4th, 2020.
Need a second? Need a second to?
I'll second it.
Okay, so I guess we're back to consent calendar. Bob, I think. Okay.
So
Wait.
are we going to vote on January 7th with that one amendment? We're kind of
I'm sorry, yeah.
off here.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. Yeah, so we have, motion now is to approve the January 7th minutes with that one amendment from Councilwoman Chan. All in
And I'll
favor?
second that.
Second, okay. Let's vote. And, Councilwoman Wolf abstains. Okay, so, Councilman Shada, let's start with you. We need to put the Mineral Springs monitoring agreement somewhere else on the agenda.
Yeah, I think we could probably just move it to council correspondence if you want. I think I'd sent an email to all of council about Dave Wolverin's concerns about it. I think he has some valid concerns, so I suppose we could do one or two things. We could send that note back to staff and have them address address those and bring it back for another meeting, or whatever your preference is.
I'm gonna have to beg ignorance, so I'm new to this job, and I will refund my paycheck up to this point for not knowing quite what I'm doing. But I'll ask, the city clerk, you know, what's the proper procedure here?
I
Wanna do
would
this right?
say that you just move it to your business section so you can take action, because there's, the correspondence section isn't really designed for the city business in that respect.
Okay,
So,
So then I just we move consent item number 1 to item number 3 under, that's H3. There's a second.
I'll stop.
And could I suggest a friendly amendment to move item F3 to item H4?
I agree.
Okay, so,
Sure.
Oh,
Yes, you agree.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
with
that's
that.
a friendly amendment, yes, sorry.
okay. All vote?
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Some of our clients will, this is absolutely fine what you're doing. Some of our clients will move the consent items that are pulled off to right after the consent items, so you can address them immediately, because it's typically something that's on the beginning of the agenda. This is totally fine.
Yeah.
We can just think about how you want to handle this in the future
Okay,
for
right.
these items. Either they can go out for new business, or at the end, they can just go right after the consent calendar for items that are pulled.
And for this evening, we've got quite a few people who would like to
I get it.
follow the order
Yep.
here, so anything we need to push it back. let's do that.
Fine.
Okay. Okay, so, item G1, presentation, Crystal Park Road team presentation of recommendations. Presentation by Karen King and Carl Stang, so you have the floor, please.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, just a minor point of order. On the consent calendar, I asked to discuss item number 3. Whatever your desire is about moving that or discussing it. So, presently, would be great.
I believe we moved that to
We
H4.
moved it,
yeah.
We moved it down to
Oh,
H3,
just,
Yeah,
both items.
that, sorry,
right, so,
I heard the 4, I didn't hear what you said.
yeah, we'll get it,
Guys,
yeah.
Just a reminder, when you speak, please make sure your lapel pin so that people can hear it. So please, thank you.
Ready?
All right.
Good evening, I'm Karen King and this is Carl Stang. We're here for the Crystal Park Road project. I sent in to Judy a background, and so I'm not going to be inclined because of time constraints to go over a great deal of the background unless you want more than I'm about to give you. Feel free to ask Carl and I. In November 2018, that's 23 months ago, people met at the cantina. There were 60 residents from Manitou and Crystal Park gated community who met to look at the issues that had been raised about speed and safety on Crystal Park Road. After that meeting, they identified 2 top issues. One was speed enforcement, and the second one was keeping the character of the neighborhood. In the year 2018, and perhaps even into early 19, there were 3 successes. One was the lane striping was put in, which many people felt was very positive towards the reduction of speed. And it also allowed people an area where they could walk between that lane striping and a property line. Another thing that happened was, and Carl really led a lot of this, was the mitigation of properties so that if people were coming out of a side street and there was foliage in the way, it was trimmed back so it made it easier to see. And I'm kind of stretching here. In the third one, we voted on what the sharrows should look like on the road. And pretty much we continued meeting every single month. But sorry to say we weren't making a lot of progress. Consequently, there was a petition, which many of you are aware of, and I'm going to fast forward to August in 2019. And that's the meeting prior to the last time Carl and I were here at council, and in addition to that, Tim Beeson was also here that night to talk about the petition. I want to say one thing before I go to August, though. With the folks who are here because you're interested and concerned about this, raise your hand. I don't know if you can see all the people out there. Clearly, this has been important to the community, and people are here tonight for that fast forward to August 2019. We had a meeting here in City Hall, and we had many of the petitioners join us at that meeting. At that point in time, we expanded the Crystal Park Road planning team to include those petitioners, so it was a much broader group now. Carl and I were trying to come up this weekend, last weekend, with how we would describe what had happened up to that point with the meetings. And we thought we'd say we just went sideways. But we thought we should be more truthful than that. The truth is that it was divisive and it was very anxiety producing. And under those circumstances, we were not going to make progress. The question put to us that night by the facilitator from Kona was, do you want to keep moving ahead? And one of the first responses was, I don't want to, but I have to, because I think if I'm not involved, it scares me too much. Another person said, I would rather go to the dentist than come to these meetings, at which point Carl said, I would rather go to the dentist and have a root canal. And so that gives you a sense of what was happening at these meetings. Now, there were about 30 to 35 people at each meeting, okay? Typically, we had some agreement and some that didn't agree. What I want to say about the 30 to 35% is I know that the night of our August meeting, one of the members showed us the letter he was sending to council. Another one distributed her letter to council, and I'm aware of the third one. So what I am aware of is that there were 10% of the people who had been at this meeting who were not happy with the direction that we were going. There were also 10% of the people that when the petition was done, who said they weren't supporting the petition, and actually that was only 8%. As a matter of fact, 92% said they did not want lights and sidewalks. Now, we weren't about lights and sidewalks in the beginning. Remember, this was about speed and keeping the character of the neighborhood. But we kind of went down a rabbit hole. So Carl and I came here in August and we made the commitment that we would, thanks Shannon, we would have 3 meetings. And if we could not come to a consensus or agreement in those 3 meetings, it could not be done. Because this had gone on for far too long. So what we did is we ran the meetings, you see the dates up there, September, October, November. We ran them differently. We opened the meetings to anybody who wanted to attend, and everyone could speak. Because previously people had to write a note, their question on a piece of paper and hand it in. And sometimes it would be answered and sometimes it wouldn't because of time or whatever reasons. So we opened it to everybody. There were people from Crystal Park gated community and Manitou residents attended these meetings. The condition was you can participate if you read the traffic study. Now the traffic study has been done since 2017. And this is what Carl and I used as our Bible to get us through those 3 meetings. And by the way, Denise, thank you for getting city representatives there for us. That was needed, and it was wonderful. It helped us move ahead. If you're familiar with this traffic study, on page 34, it's sad that I know that, on page 34 is a summary. And the summary is pretty simple, but what Carl and I knew immediately was that we couldn't work off of the summary because the summary contradicted what was in some of the traffic report, and it was kind of like a really bad Cliff Notes version. So instead, we opted to go item by item through the guts of the traffic plan, and we went section by section up the road to attempt to come to consensus, and if not a consensus, a supermajority. In some cases, we tweaked the wording of the traffic study. This is recommendations. We were asked by you to come to consensus, or maybe not all of you. Some of you weren't here then. And we did our very best to reach that. Amazingly, I'm going to let Carl's going to take over from here. You're going to see that in most cases, we were able, I don't know how, but to reach consensus. So, Carl, next slide.
And I think it's important to point out that this is a long simmering issue, right? The fact that this traffic study was done in 2017 predates, this group. The group was brought forward to, try the community consensus process as an experiment. We were only first. We had challenges. go through these fairly quickly, but, this is just the consensus summarized. And so out on our workplace site, there's detailed minutes with more details. This is just the boiled up version. But starting from the bottom, the Crystal Park Road and Poplar Place intersection, there was 100% consensus to improve that crosswalk, right? The picture there, you can see the crosswalk in the distance. Traffic coming, around that blind corner doesn't have great sight lines. And so the traffic study calls out ways to improve that. There was also consensus around installing potentially a pedestrian activated beacon, that is minimally impacting for the residents because there's concerns about lights. And so that was one of the first things that we discussed in our meetings, and it was a very simple discussion to get consensus. We go to the next slide, please. So this is the working up, so from Old Crystal Park Road to Town and Country. So this is just past the Old Crystal Park Road, the picture on the right, looking at Town and Country in the corner. So the discussion was trying to improve this informal walking path. We were able to get 100% consensus to improve this, to add a pedestrian walkway with no sidewalks. Right? The concern and almost recurring theme is people have invested money into fencing. This here, there's also adobe fences, and they don't want those impacted by these improvements. But if you can put it in, make alignments, we had Jeff there discuss a lot of this stuff. If you can change the alignment and fit a pedestrian path, there was 100% consensus for that. Continuing around the corner, there's a section of sidewalk in front of Town and Country. Past that, there's the turnarounds. So there's discussion of having an extension of that pedestrian walkway up to the Willa guardrail. There again, we were able to get consensus on that discussion. As well, this traffic study talks about additional signage. The discussion that we had, the consensus was not to add any more signage, but to keep and maintain the Sherrills for cyclists. So this is covering Sutherland Road to Stover Lane. So Cheyenne Village, we all know that is up for sale, and that's kind of out of our control. So we kind of tabled that, and we assume Manitou planning and codes will address that, and it'll be what it'll be. So then the next focus was just Cheyenne Village to Stover Lane. So here, echoing what Karen already said earlier, the traffic lane striping, 100% consensus that should be maintained, and it's actually already starting to wear off the road. So in need of potentially being painted again. There's also consensus on having signage for the blind curve, dangerous roadway in that section closer to Stover, and no one, everybody recognizes, like in the picture here, there's not, the road is very narrow, fences are right up to the edge of the road. There's not space for sidewalk without major impact to people's property. Not to mention it slopes off. It would be cost prohibitive to put anything in. So 100% consensus, and the traffic study I think agrees as well. No sidewalks in this section. So here, Stover to Stover, because Stover is a circle. Suggestion to potentially consider, suggesting to users to use that as a pedestrian bypass. Adding share the road signs. Consensus on that. And then as well, this is at the stop sign at Crystal Park Road and Crystal Hills. We did some mitigation in that section, but really the consensus here was to improve that into a pedestrian walkway, into a trail, right? Something that's natural and suits the neighborhood. And then the last section, this is, we can go just a smidge, no worries. Crystal Hills Boulevard to Inman Trail. So this is, there's 100% consensus to improve that existing informal trail into an actual pedestrian trail. And then with that, the last slide is our recurring themes and recommendations.
Okay, so themes that came up over and over again. It was not included in the traffic study to add lighting. However, because of the TPP grant, which was put in, lighting was a big issue. Because that grant called for sidewalks, lighting, curbs, and gutters. All the way through, people were saying we do not want additional lighting. That goes with the next point actually right there, and back to the original meeting in February of 2018, keeping the character of the neighborhood. People do not want sidewalks or lights. Speed control. There he is. I love that man. I have to tell, we're both Hoosiers. Brian came to our meeting in December, did an outstanding job of addressing speed issues. And I will tell you, when Carl and I were running these 3 meetings, every single meeting, people wanted to talk about speed, and we have to say, no, that's in December. That's in December. And so Chief Churchill addressed that, and people decided, it was a supermajority, one person disagreed, that we would not move forward or request anything else, but give him a chance to work his plan. And I will tell you, many people back here are thrilled with the heads Bob, because there's police presence, and we think it's beginning to make a difference, and it's going to make an even bigger difference as time goes on. So kudos to you, that was great.
One thing to quickly point out, the picture here, you can't see it very well, but the speed radar trap, the mobile speed trap, is there in the distance, and that car is hitting their brakes because they're going above the speed limit. I kept it out of focus intentionally. How fast but what's really whose license plate is that?
So, the recommendation part, this is why all these folks are here, and I'm gonna, as best I can, walk you through that, and we're doing pretty well. The first 2 items, proceed with the Poplar Place school crossing improvements and with the pedestrian trail improvements. Those 2 recommendations, I think we lay at your feet. They are going to entail time and money. And so we're just saying, those are recommendations. You get to figure out now what you want to do. And Denise is sitting there shaking her head, okay? The third one, continue to maintain lane striping and investigate signage. I think that goes to Jeff Jones. I think that's his world. And we're just asking that he first of all maintains the striping. I'm sure since they've done it once, they want to continue it and investigate the signage. And we give that present to Jeff, okay? The third one, I've already given him his kudos. Continue with the speed enforcement. We really think it's making a difference. And for those of you who don't know, this has been an issue. One of the neighbors actually has an email from 20 years ago requesting this, and we just have been dealing with this over and over again. So it is wonderful. Okay, this is the biggie, okay? When this was started, and we volunteered to work on this group, there was an if-then statement. And the statement was, if you follow this process and come back to council with recommendations and consensus, then we will accept your recommendations. Now, I think we're really not suggesting that we're going to make a decision on things that cost time and money. That's up to the city and to figure out how that happens. However, on this TPP grant, in the Manitou 2020 city plan, under Jeff Jones' section, it says that there is a committee that is now called the Crystal Hills Improvement Project. And I checked with Jeff, and he confirmed, is he here? There you are, I thought that was you. Jeff confirmed. That's right, you keep me honest.
I got you.
Jeff confirmed, as he did last November, I checked that email as well, that the Crystal Hills Improvement Project was to look at that included the grant, the TPP grant, which was the lights, sidewalks, curbs, gutters, and stormwater improvements, okay? So, we're coming here saying that we don't want that. And that's why these folks are here. That's what happened in the petition. That's what happened with either 100% consensus or 97%. And the reason I come to 97% is I'm erring on the low end. We have 30 to 35 people at each meeting. If we had one that did not agree, that's 97%. Okay? And so I want to ask you on behalf of folks that are out there and the people that are here and the petition, which by the way, Tim, where are you? How many people signed that petition? 159?
159 people signed it, we talked to 159 people, 148 of those people signed the petition. We were all amazed.
And that was 92%. 92%.
Can you reiterate what the petition said?
And the petition said, please, we do not want lights, we do not want sidewalks, we do want speed enforcement, and we really don't want to do anything that would increase traffic dramatically on that road. So there is very strong community support saying that we don't want that. And so I'm asking you tonight, after months of angst is probably a good word, dread, fear, anxiety, that people have had to spend a lot of time guessing about what was going to happen to their neighborhood. And we have followed through, and we have worked to get consensus. And I would respectfully, after Carl says what he's going to say, ask you if you will vote tonight to let us know that this is going to stop. And that we did the work, we came through, and that's what we're asking you for.
And I think it's important to note that, that TPP grant was written very broadly to cover, any possible future changes, but the way it was interpreted by folks was literal, and so that caused lots of turmoil, like Karen just mentioned. So.
Well, and Jeff has confirmed that that grant is sidewalks, lights, curbs, gutters, and stormwater improvement,
Very
correct?
broad.
Yeah. So how do we ask you for that?
We don't want.
We do not, we do not.
I can get the feeling that it's not stressed strong enough. That petition talked to everybody who lives on the road or adjacent road. 159 people talked to, over 90% said stop funding for this. Loudly, stop funding is what the petition said. And so what we're asking you is for you to take, listen to that.
Sir, could you come up to the podium and
Sure.
you give us your name and address?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Joe Keith. I'm, live at 126 Crystal Park Road. And I came into this process kind of late, about halfway through what Karen described. And I'm known to get up and speak a little bit at each meeting. When I feel like things aren't being said enough. And I just say, I'm gonna say it like we felt, right? So what I'm trying to say is, a lot of work was done by virtually a lot of the people in this room to get a reading of what the community thought about this idea of sidewalks, lights, and mainly sidewalks, I think. And speed was there, and I don't want to talk about speed, but the fear was sidewalks, right? And lights. We don't want that. And that petition that Tim did showed, we wanted to make a map, and I don't know if that map ever got shown. It showed all the houses along Crystal Park Road and adjacent roads. And we talked to virtually every one of those houses on that street. And 90% of the people said, we want to stop funding for this work, because we don't want that. And so I just wanted to get up and say very strongly, that's what the people here are saying.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, certainly. Mr. Stang, if you have the floor back, I think you had some comments you wanted to continue with.
The only point I was going to make that in all this discussion, I think people had differences, but the consensus discussion, people were not that far apart. And so, I think we're splitting hairs, but Joe is completely valid in what he said.
Council, they have explained what they'd like to have from us.
I have some comments that I'd like to make. First of all, welcome to our world. I think this is a classic example of what council has to go through all the time when the community disagrees on things. So it's kind of interesting and kind of fun from my perspective to see, you guys have to deal with it. That being said, I watched the whole process. I was intimately involved in it for quite a while, and it's disappointing to me to see that it went from over 200 people who had one thing in mind to 148 who had something else in mind. And then there were two parallel processes going for a while. So it's really unfortunate that what was intended to be something to bring the community together ultimately seems to have split the community apart. Because I can tell you that for a lot of people that are dead against sidewalks, lights was never an issue. I never heard lights as an issue, that was desired or suggested. But I got lots of people who came and said that they did want sidewalks. And I guess I would ask you, who's going to maintain, or who's going to create and maintain the paths? Did you say Jeff you were recommending Jeff do that?
I think does that fall into your world, Jeff?
And mitigating the sight lines and so on?
Well, we have talked about continuing to have neighbors do the mitigation.
Okay. All right. Anyway, thank you. So it's been a very unfortunate process ultimately. That being said, we did get the resolution that council passed last year, or 2 years ago, I guess now, where we would comply with the what the group came up with. So I have every intention of voting for your recommendations. Lastly, I want to thank you guys, all of you, every single one of you, for all the work, because I know it's been a heck of a haul for you, and you did stick with it. You were dedicated, and you tried really hard. So thank you for that, even though I'm very disappointed in the outcome, because I am a very heavy user of that road. So any number of times have almost hit people and almost been hit. So there's a difference between safety, because I know there have been very few accidents on that road, and a perception of safety. And I'm also a huge advocate of walking and biking. And the fact that people still do not feel safe on that road is problematic for me, because perception of safety incentivizes or disincentivizes people to either walk or bike. And Chief, I have also noticed the significantly increased police presence on that road, and have been most appreciative of it. So thanks to you as well. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. I'm going to start by also saying thank you all for being here, and really, I don't know that in my 2 years on council I've ever seen anything be this engaged. And so thank you. And I do want to remind you that since you have all this great experience, that we haven't had people sign up to run for council. So please don't lose your sharpness on that.
We nominate Tim Newsom.
Really, as I went through the process, I saw you guys come together. My impression of it is just a respectful disagreement with our mayor pro tem. Because I don't live in that neighborhood, and I acknowledge that first and foremost. I saw you guys come together on a lot of things, maybe not on some of these core things, but you started to get to know each other, and you started to trim those tree limbs, and it sounds like a little thing, it's a huge thing, and we don't do it enough. So my biggest comment is I support your recommendations. I appreciate you sticking through this process. I know it wasn't easy, and I had one citizen ask me a question today, and I don't know if it applies or not, so bear with me. On this trail that you want to do, is there any way that Safe Routes is not funded through the school, but funded through cities, and it's a grant program, and it allows the Safe Routes for children to walk to school? And I didn't know if that had been explored, yes or no. And I know that you're going to want to move forward on some trail, and I just wanted to make sure that I passed on that question of whether or not that might be something that would help with that trail and help Public Works. So I asked that question. Again, I can't tell you thank you enough, and I hope that I see you guys again on other issues, because I'm really impressed with the work that you guys have done on, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I think the ask, the TP grant is don't spend that on sidewalks, but I don't think there's resistance to spending on the Poplar Creek crossing or trails, right? So I don't think it's a absolute, this is the whole, I think we're closer together than people think we are, right? And so it's not a true no.
If I can add something, because I think what happened beginning in April of last year, folks really began to get involved. I mean, when do you have these numbers of people coming to council? These people partied together at the holiday. People have been working together. And so there are a lot of really good things that came about because of it. And there, it's also true with what Nancy said, is that some people are not happy. I don't know how you make everybody happy, okay? But I know how you can make 92% of the folks happy. You know, that ain't bad.
That's one more discussion.
Number one, certainly reinforce Nancy's and Susan's comments about what you've done in your community. I have more technical kinds of questions to ask, which is, number one, what about the sewers? You know, I've heard you don't want the TPP grants that include sewers, or to focus on the other three items, but what about the sewers?
We did not say we don't want the TPP grant. We said we do not want licensed sidewalks.
Okay, just that component of the TPP.
That's correct.
Okay. Second technical question is, are we able to shift the funding in this grant? It's not a question I would expect assistance to answer, but can we transfer the funds from sidewalks and curbs to paths and crossings and signage and so forth?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll be honest with you, I haven't looked into transferring the funds for that. But I'd like to say is that I did have the opportunity to sit in on several meetings.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Could you take the podium?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. We need, I'm reminding you.
I thought my mouth was big enough. So I did have the opportunity to attend, and good fortune to attend a lot of meetings, and I see a lot of folks there that I do know.
Mr. Jones, would you give us your name, please?
I'm sorry, Jeff Jones. And from what I took from the meetings is, and I attended, I think maybe 3 along the way before, I think that's what it was, September, October.
August.
In August. That the focus narrowed down from a wide array of concerns for the area down to mainly, and correct me if I'm wrong, speeding obviously, number one. Then we had signage, the trails on the road, and striping, and trails.
Right.
One problem with the trails was that the fact that some of them were so close to the roadway, I was concerned about safety of people using them. Because on some of the roadways, a lot of the roadways, you have roadway ends to the side, and then you have sheer embankment and cliffs there. So there wasn't really a way to do it feasibly or financially. It would make good sense to do all that work and still be safe there. So that was a concern. I think that what I hear tonight is that there is a way to make some instant impact to improve that area for the folks that live there. And I think some of the things that we could do that would be a needed impact would be signage. I think that's definitely something we can do. The striping, that'll take more of an undertaking to take place because it's about money. So we can figure that out. And certainly, I know we talked about, or you guys talked about the crossings for the kids.
Yes.
Down there by that curve, that dangerous curve.
Right.
And it is coming from that way. It's hard to see. As far as the painting and the crosswalks, that's pretty easy. Now, when you talk about putting lights and pedestrian crossings, it's doable. But of course, it's going to cost funds, and you have to have a way to power them if they're solar, if or whatever, or if they're wired in. There's ways we can do that. Some of those things we can do. It's a quicker impact.
So just to point out the Poplar Creek crossing, the traffic study recommendation is to move that sidewalk further east to improve the sight line.
So we would move it further east, which means we would have to have a sidewalk on that one side where there's not one, to
East of the intersection.
East of the intersection. Right. There's not one on the right hand side because the sidewalk's actually on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
So that creates a problem, which can be overcome. The problems are there because they're called problems because we overcome. So that could be done as well. I mean, it would be a safety issue that we can take care of right away. As far as transferring funds for that study, I don't know if we can do that onto other entities. like you mentioned, I'm not sure.
So that could be a comeback item, and that's where we are.
It could be, and we
That's
can
fine.
look into that,
That's fine.
obviously. But what I did take from their meetings, definitely, was no to sidewalks and no to lighting. I got that loud and clear from what I heard. And which is fine, because that's what they want, that's their community.
So in the earlier discussion, Diane Lotion, was involved in that TPP grant. She indicated that there was an opportunity to go back. I mean, that was a placeholder and go back and
Mr.
update
Steen,
it.
could you come up to the podium, please?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So Diane Lotion, was involved from Congo to help facilitate the meeting's beginning, and she mentioned with the TPP grant, and I don't know if it was a speculation or fact, but that was a placeholder and there was opportunity to go back and adjust the wording, and as we finalize details, and it was written broadly enough that we could change the sidewalk to a trail. So it seemed like there was a potential opportunity there to leverage that same grant.
Thank you, and that's an open item. We'll hear more about it in the budget and so forth. I'd also like to compliment Mr. Jones on identifying quick fixes that are not material money-wise. You can get right on, and that's wonderful. My last technical question is this. I do understand within your catchment of individuals, you've got 92% consensus. I'm just curious, is there some group that's a large number of people that are not au fait with this? I just couldn't tell if you have indeed hosted a public meeting and indeed every person who's eligible participated in it or knew to participate in it.
Let me give you 3 instances, okay? The most recent, with what we did at these meetings, we had either 100% agreement or 97% agreement on all items. 2 of the people who gave you letters for the August meeting were at those meetings. And so they had a chance to voice their concerns and to vote on those items as well. Okay, so there has really been some movement in that direction. On the, and they do not live in the same neighborhoods. So the people who are closest to the road and on Sandra and on Stover and Crystal Park Place and the small little streets up behind the cantina are all really in agreement for 92% of the time. Okay?
But it represents, the petition represented the people who live either adjacent to the road or very close to the road. It does not represent the users of the road.
It's property owners.
Property owners, thank you, yeah.
That's correct. And at our last meetings, about, correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, 20 to 25% of the participants were from Crystal Park. And as I said, we let everybody vote. We just didn't allow the planning team to vote. So everybody had a chance to voice their opinion. And boy, I gotta tell you, if you don't think that's scary to walk in and just take this over and say, okay, we're gonna do it differently and everybody counts. But it worked. And people heard each other and they talked and it worked.
We are running over time for what we planned here, so I'd like to kind of get this wrapped up. I know it's Mr. Beeson who's going to pass. It seems to me what council's being asked to do tonight is to basically set some direction, some guidance. And it seems like that it's reasonably clear cut what you're asking for. The resolution that was drawn up, the contract essentially between the city and you is, I think, the intent is for the city to honor its word. So council, do we have a motion? Do we have some action here?
I don't think we need a motion. I think just if everyone's in agreement that the council would support the recommendations as outlined by the committee tonight in accordance with the resolution that we passed in October of 2018.
I have a question about that. So what does that mean if we say that we support it? Is that like it just sounds like a feeling as opposed to an action.
Well, all we'd be doing is giving guidance to staff to implement within the budget, within budgetary constraints and staff resource constraints to implement the recommendations as outlined.
And would part of that be for the staff to review the TPP grant language?
Yes.
To inquire whether we can allocate some of these funds for what's been used?
I would think that would be very appropriate. We would do that.
Thank you for clarifying.
I understand that, if I may, but for these folks back here, and I just don't wanna get killed when we go to the cantina later. That if you could please say something for us that says no sidewalks, no lights, because we have been through this for darn near 2 years, and we wanna be done with it, and done.
Your recommendations say honor that last one, and I think what we're saying is to implement the recommendations as outlined.
So just one thing to add for consideration, I mean, the TPP grant was an 80% match, so there is a 20% city requirement to match anything we do take action on that costs funding. And we, previously, that was a budget item in 2018, 2019, I'm not sure if it's, where it's at anymore, given the spin about the grant, but just for your awareness.
Mr. Mayor, along the lines of which, the guidance you can give the council, I'd like to suggest that staff come back with a motion that we could formally make at our next regular meeting to basically memorialize the intentions of the guys, but I think we should go a little stronger than just guidance, because then the community walks away with something that's black and white, and so does staff, and frankly, so do we.
Are you proposing a resolution?
Doesn't need to be a resolution, but just a motion that gets entered into our minutes. Resolution, maybe Jeff or Judy can provide us guidance on that.
I would certainly be willing to make a motion tonight to do that, to just say that I would move that we implement the recommendations as outlined in the briefing this evening, as in accordance with the resourcing that we have.
I second that motion.
Any further discussion?
Why aren't we saying no lights and no sidewalks? I guess my concern is that these things go on, and then a year later, we're looking at the money, and 2 years later, there'll be new council members up here, and I've just seen it happen too many times. So I guess these people here maybe they're telling us they want to hear that. I'd like to know why we can't say it.
Yeah.
Question.
If the city council would like to have this reduced to writing, we could put this in a resolution, reference the study, and have it for your next meeting. If you want a more firm record, it's really up to you, because a motion and a resolution generally have the same legal effect. But I can draft something up for your consideration if you prefer.
Or couldn't we just get a little more specific and maybe add 1 or 2 sentences to Nancy's?
And we certainly could. My only concern with that is that, as you said last week, Susan, or 2 weeks ago, that anything can be overturned by future council, and I guess communities change as well. So how long would that be in effect for? I mean, what I'm suggesting is we only go in accordance with what currently is on their recommendations, because in the future, 10 years hence, they may come back and say, we want sidewalks now, but oh, that council 10 years ago said no.
Could I say something to that?
And they'll, someone will have the resolution that they'll pull out of there. Anyway, so that's why I have no intention of promoting sidewalks and lights for the community.
And I agree with that, but is the TPP grant going to go on for that long? That's, I guess, my question. Because this really has to do with if that grant comes through, we don't want it, they're saying they don't want it spent on that. But I hear what you're saying, and that's an overall question I have every day on the council.
I would be very willing to amend my motion to say that we implement the recommendations as shown in the briefing this evening, to include that the TPP grant, if awarded and accepted, will not include sidewalks and lights.
I would second.
Yeah.
Just to help you guys, my name's Shannon Solomon, 600 Crystal Hills Boulevard. 15 years ago, I was on city council, and this same thing came up. And the community, not nearly as diplomatic or well organized, said the same thing. So, just so you know, 15 years ago, the same thing happened. So please solidify this and go forward with it. Thank you, guys.
So we have a motion and a second. Motion? Any further discussion? Let's vote.
Thank you, Karen and Carl.
We'll just wait a minute.
Good job. Go have fun. Have fun? Yeah, I know, that's what I always go have fun.
See ya.
Would you like to get on our next item of business? Let's go on to the next item of business, please.
Chief Churchill.
He retired. He got out of that.
Okay, thank you. The next item of business, item G2, is Colorado Springs Energy Integrated Resource Plans Update. Sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us. My name is Christian Nelson. I'm a Senior Government Affairs Specialist at Colorado Springs Utilities. Presenting with me will be Michael Avanzi, who's right to my right now. He is our Manager of Planning and Innovation, which I actually think is the coolest job title that we've got in the organization. And with us as well is Mr. Joel Watt, who's our General Manager of Planning and Engineering, and Bill Bolch, who's our Account Manager for the city. So we're here to give the city an update on our energy integrated resource plans. Those cover both electric and gas, and we'll be referring to those as IRPs from here on out, a little bit less of a mouthful. So the agenda for our presentation, we're going to give you a timeline of the integrated resource plans. We are actually in the second phase of those plans right now. We were here during our first phase to give you an update on that. We'll review the phase one so that we can bring you up to speed on where we've been. We'll talk about the attributes and ranking process we are currently in the midst of for the second phase of the IRPs. And then we'll talk to you about the next steps in our process, which runs through July of this year. So our objective really is to provide you an update on the IRP and to learn about your priorities and preferences regarding energy planning. Our public input process that engages all of our customers has been a very thorough and robust one, where we do need input from outside of our organization in the development of these plans. So we started with, in last spring, we were talking about what we call our energy vision. And that's linked to Colorado Springs Utilities' mission and vision itself as an organization. Our mission is to provide safe, reliable, competitively priced electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater services to the citizens and customers of Colorado Springs Utilities. Our vision is to be a treasured community partner, well known for responsible and dependable services that are vital to the future of our entire region. So, engaging our Utilities Policy Advisory Committee and a public process last spring, we revamped what we call the energy vision. linking that to our organization's mission and vision. The energy vision that UPAC came up with and was approved by the Utilities Board is to provide resilient, reliable, and cost-effective energy that is environmentally sustainable, reduces our carbon footprint, and uses proven state-of-the-art technologies to enhance our quality of life for generations to come. Where our intent is for this vision to guide our planning well into the future. We do an IRP every 5 years, and each IRP is a 30-year look into the future. We want a vision that's going to guide our planning through multiple IRP processes. The IRP is founded on 4 pillars: economic, environment, resiliency, and innovation. All of that is founded upon the foundation of the community or communities that we serve. So the economic pillar of being cost-effective, environment, basically sustainable solutions, resiliency, which includes reliability, the ability to withstand disturbances or anything that would affect our ability to deliver natural gas and electric service, and that innovation pillar to proactively and responsibly evolve in a transforming landscape. Obviously, in the energy industry, more has changed in the last 10 years than in the last 100. So, as I mentioned before, our Utilities Policy Advisory Committee is basically acting as the chair or steering committee for the public process plan. They're evaluating the feedback that they're getting from the technical staff, the planning and the engineering staff, and weighing that and considering that along with public input so that they can provide the best recommendations to the Utilities Board, who makes the final decision and direction. They are doing that through 3 different phases, and that's what's illustrated here in this arrow. That first phase that will review the reference case, basically the starting point, the inputs and sensitivities and goals that set the parameters of the study. Those were approved in October by the Utilities Board. Moving on to the second phase, which is looking at the portfolio attributes. Basically what the attributes are, and what Michael will describe for you, is how we are weighing resource portfolios against other portfolios. It involves much more than just looking for the lowest cost solution. It's looking for the most reliable, the most environmentally sustainable, and what the best cost is, along with multiple factors. So we are coming to the conclusion of our second phase there, where UPAC will be making a recommendation to the board in February for the board's direction in March. After which we'll start that third phase, the portfolio recommendation, with metrics for their evaluation. And those will be determined or recommended by UPAC to the board in June for approval in July. So what is an IRP? Basically, they are a roadmap. They combine that technical analysis, public input to meet forecasted electric and natural gas needs of the community. Like I said, this is a 30-year look that we're studying. Obviously, a lot changes between now and 30 years, which is why we undergo an integrated resource plan process every 5 years. So it's a rolling 30-year look, if you will. They look at both supply, demand side resources, which is basically conservation, to ensure that resilient, reliable, and cost-effective energy is environmentally sustainable. So this is similar to the arrow that we just showed you. These are what goes into each phase. Phase 1 were those dark blue wedges of this, if you will. We are basically right about here, the wedge number 5 and 6. We'll be going into those portfolio attributes that are determined at the end of this phase, and then determining the course of action along with UPAC for our customers for that final resource portfolio. I'm rushing through these, so if there's a question you need me to hover on or explain a little bit more in depth, I can do that. So within that first phase, we did set some goals for this IRP. We matched these to that energy vision. Like I said, our energy vision should be the guide for our planning resources. We want under resilient, reliable, looking at being industry-leading reliability and resiliency, avoiding those potential stranded assets, supporting the economic growth of the region. We have a cost-effective energy goal to maintain competitive and affordable rates, to further advance energy efficiency and demand response. We're looking at an environmentally sustainable goal of this integrated resource plan, to grow our renewable portfolio, to establish timelines for decommissioning of assets, power plants. I know everybody's wondering, so I thought I'd say it. We have a reducing our carbon footprint goal to meet all environmental regulations with specific metrics that include reducing our carbon footprint. Obviously, state law figures a lot into this IRP, where we have a new state mandate to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030, for example, using proven state-of-the-art technology to proactively and responsibly integrate new technologies. So not using technology that hasn't been proven in its use yet, but still trying to remain ahead of the curve, if you will. And all of this to enhance our quality of life for generations to come. These IRPs are very significant. So we're looking at, like we mentioned, decommissioning of assets, setting dates for the Drake Power Plant, the Birdsall Power Plant, studying the Nixon Power Plant, which is south of Colorado Springs, looking at our gas and non-potable supply, water supply changes, because our plants are so reliant upon that changes to one service do affect others. Environmental carbon strategies, the emergence of battery storage in a way that's more useful and widespread. You just see there are a lot going on in our industry, there's a lot going on in our community, and the impact of these particular IRPs are going to be felt for a long time. So I'm going to hand it over. Michael and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation a bit. He's going to review what was studied in phase 1 and determined by the board.
Good evening. My name is Michael Avanzi. My team is responsible for leading this IRP process, but it really is a monumental effort. We work with teams like Christians, and about 100 employees across the organization are involved in this process. And then, just like tonight, lots of public input, lots of public process associated with this. We wanted to provide you a recap of phase 1 of the IRP. The last time we were in front of you, there's new council members I see, there's a new mayor. Our phase 1 had not been approved by our board yet. We presented to you a draft of phase 1. So we wanted to provide a recap tonight of what our board ultimately did settle on. And the first thing was those goals that Christian just presented was one of the deliverables. Another was what was the reference case. And the reference case is basically just our starting point. What has our board previously directed us to do? That's what we're going to start with, and then we make tweaks to that and see how it impacts our assumptions. So, for example, renewables. Our board has previously directed us to proceed with renewable projects totaling a little over 260 megawatts of solar in our system. So that's a starting point assumption. That's already part of our portfolio that the board has directed us to move forward with. We'll be looking at adding more renewables on top of that throughout our various models that we're running in this process. And that's what we call sensitivities. That's where we take those starting assumptions and we make one change at a time to see how it impacts cost, how it impacts the environment, how it impacts our reliability. So some of the things we look at are like our load, how high or low is our load growth going to be, how much is our city going to grow, how much is the city of Manitou going to grow. We look at things like what dates we're going to decommission different plants, and we'll show some slides here in a little bit on the different dates we're looking at. We look at different targets on carbon reduction. So Christian alluded to the state's requirement of 50% by 2030, but that is for the entire economy, for the whole state. That's not just utility sector, but that's buildings, that's cars, that's every sector that emits carbon. We don't know how that's going to shake out yet between the different sectors. So as a result of that, we've got to study all these different possibilities of what it means for us as a utility. So some of those plant decommission sensitivities, I think Drake, is always at the forefront of everybody's mind. Our current board direction
So our reference case assumption is no later than 2035, because that's our board's current direction from the prior IRP. But we are looking at moving that up as soon as 2023. So we're studying 2023, 2025, all these different years and combinations, and how we can make that work most effectively for our ratepayers. Nixon is our other coal plant that nobody really talks about yet, but it is our other coal plant nonetheless, and it currently doesn't have a decommission date established, but we're going to look at closing that plant as soon as 2026. And we're studying all the way through 2050 in this IRP. So this is a 30-year plan that we're putting together. Front Range is our gas plant that's down there on the same property as Nixon. And when we look out all the way to 2050, Front Range is going to be about 50 years old. So it's going to be getting to be near the end of life at that point. So we're looking at different dates for potentially closing that gas plant as well. And then there's some different environmental measures that we can take, like putting catalytic reduction on our plants to reduce those emissions. That's another possibility we're looking at. On renewables, so we're going all the way to 100% in our studies here. We're seeing if that's possible for our community here to get to 100% as soon as 2030 on renewable energy. And then we're studying all kinds of possibilities from where we are today up until that 100% mark here. With carbon reduction, we're looking at the 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. Those are the minimum goals that the state has put forward. But we're looking at going higher than that, potentially, with other sensitivities. This is actually the first time we've ever done our electric and our gas integrated resource plans at the same time. So that puts more strain on staff, and why we have even more people involved in this process. But it's really paramount that we do that, because electric and gas are so closely tied at the hip. We produce electricity using natural gas today. There's a possibility we may end up producing more power with gas when we go away from coal. So these are possibilities we're looking at. Has an impact on our gas supply to the city, which we purchase off the market, and we have one pipeline that serves our whole community. So it's important that we plan long-term for that reliable gas supply to our community, so you can run your furnaces and your water heaters, and you can cook reliably with natural gas. So same principle. We start with a reference case on the gas side as well. And then we run all different kinds of sensitivities. So that was our first phase, which concluded in October, I believe, when the board approved that set of deliverables. Then we immediately started on phase 2. We've been working on that since October. And like Christian said, we'll be looking to conclude that phase in March. And it's all about the attributes. It's all about how we're going to score those portfolios that come out of phase 3. How we're going to compare those, how we're going to weight those against each other. And there's been an extensive public process with this phase. We had nearly 2,000 responses to our survey that we sent out to the community. Hopefully some of you in here took our survey, because this is really about what's important to the community. What are those communities' priorities? Is cost more important than the environment? Is reliability more important than innovation? Those types of questions we're asking ourselves in this phase 2 process. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity also to come to our public workshop next week on the 29th. It's going to be at Library 21C, and we're going to be asking for communities' input on these attributes and how they can be applied to the portfolios. So we started with, I can almost get it on the screen here. We started with 8 attributes in the beginning of this that staff recommended to our UPAC committee. And those are cost, diversity, environment, flexibility, innovation, implementation, reliability, and stewardship. I'm not going to read you all these definitions, but we have provided definitions that we think resonate with our community, that make these understandable, what we think they mean for our community. Over here on the right, you'll see a bunch of X's with percentages. Those will be filled in at the end of this phase 2. Those are going to be the weightings of those attributes. So what percent of each one of these attributes is going to be applied when we score the portfolios? They may or may not be equally weighted. For example, the community might want to put more emphasis on cost than one of these other attributes, potentially. So those will be filled in as part of this phase. So I mentioned our survey. We had about 2,000 responses. And one of the questions we asked on that survey was, we asked our customers, our community, we gave them 100 points. And we said you can allocate those 100 points any way you want across these 8 attributes. You can give 100 points if you want. You can split them up equally. You can split them up however you want. So this is the results of that survey. And we had residential customers reply to the survey. We had commercial customers. We had employees take the survey. We had over 350 employees take this survey. That's a good number for us. And then we had an open survey, which we just put on our website, and we said anybody can take this. They don't have to be a customer necessarily. Anybody can take it. And so that's the different colors of these bars. And you'll see that value-wise, the community put more value on cost and environment and reliability. Those were the 3 key attributes for the community. And then the rest of them were about the same in that 8 to 10% range for points. And that was diversity, flexibility, implementation, innovation, and stewardship. And this really wasn't a surprise. We've seen an emphasis on cost and reliability, especially over many years. And environment is really coming on lately, especially with what's going on in Denver and at the state level. Lots of emphasis on the environment, protecting the environment. So then in our last UPAC meeting on the 15th, we asked UPAC, do you want to keep this list of 8 attributes? Do you want to consolidate any of them? Do you want to eliminate any of them? Do you want to add more? We asked them all those questions. We also asked these other questions on the survey too. We're just showing the one result here, but we asked a lot of these questions to the community. And through our survey and our public workshops, everything we've done throughout this process, it was pretty apparent that there was an effort. There was an emphasis on maybe wanting to consolidate the attributes. The community maybe thought that 8 was too many to consider. Not that they wanted to eliminate any of these, but they thought some could be consolidated because there was a lot of similarities between, for example, environment and stewardship. I thought there was a lot of similarities there. So in that meeting on the 15th, what UPAC settled on is that they would consolidate the list of attributes down to 5, and this is the latest consolidation. So they took cost and implementation and combined those. They took environment and stewardship, combined those into one attribute. Flexibility and diversity, and then they left innovation and reliability as standalone attributes. And we did go ahead and update the definitions with those consolidated attributes. And this is what we will be using next week at our public workshop to get input from the members of the public that come to that event. This will also be the starting point for our February UPAC meeting, where the UPAC will make their final recommendation to the Utilities Board in late February. They'll present that, which will be whatever list of attributes they settle on, plus the weightings. Remember the weightings, we have to apply those percentages to these. And this is just, again, taking that slide I showed you before with the results from the survey and the consolidation of down to the 5. This is what it would look like. So cost and implementation, And environment and stewardship would be your two main value attributes for the community, with cost and implementation somewhere in the 30% range. Environment and stewardship slightly less than that. And then flexibility and diversity, about 15%. Innovation would be our low one at about 8%. And then reliability somewhere in the 20% range. So this will all be input that the board, that the UPAC uses at their February meeting to come up with those weightings for the final recommendation to the board. And then this is just an example of, this is more of a phase 3 thing, but in phase 3 we're going to come up with a number of portfolios, probably in the neighborhood of 10 portfolios or so, that we present ultimately to the board, and they're all going to be scored based on the attributes, the final attribute list that the board approves in phase 2, with those weightings. So this top row here would be whatever, and this is just example, so don't take these numbers to mean anything. This is just purely for demonstration purposes. Those weightings will be applied. Each of the portfolios would get a score, 1 through 5 score on each of those attributes. You just take that score, multiply it by the weighting to come up with a total weighted score for each attribute, and then you just add those together to get a total score for each portfolio. That would give you an initial indication of which portfolio may have the most value to our community based on the technical process that's been done, married with the public input that's been received. So it's a little preview of what you might see in the June timeframe. At this point, I guess we'll stop and take any questions, and then we'll
talk next steps.
And then we'll conclude with next steps. So, any questions? Y'all been quiet to this point. So.
Yes, can you explain what you'll be doing at your the 29th meeting, so that people who might want to go might get with us?
Sure. So the presentation on the 29th is going to look similar to this. We're going to provide background information, a recap of what we've done up to this point. And then basically we're going to break the public, whoever shows up, into breakout groups. And we're going to ask them to look at each one of the attributes, those 5 that we consolidated down to, and basically score those attributes, right?
Right. We'll be, because this meeting will kind of be the first chance for the public to view this newly revised list of attributes. We'll go through a similar exercise that we did with the survey and ask the people there to rate those attributes against each other. Does it change the priority order? And that way UPAC can use that on their February 5th meeting as they're considering weightings for each one. So really we're looking for the priority value of the community, of all who attend that. Thank you.
Any other questions right now?
Just a brief follow-up with that explanation. It sounds like the public meeting is going to be exactly the same as what your polling did when you went to these entities, right?
Right, except that the only thing that has changed is the attributes that we're working with, because we started with 8, so right, and now going to 5. So we haven't lost any, but people haven't seen the revised list with those attributes combined. So Michael showed the value score that was taken from the survey as kind of a theoretical response, but because that wasn't what was actually surveyed, those numbers wouldn't have been exactly that, probably in the ballpark. We know that throughout the surveys, regardless of the audience, whether it was the residential, the commercial, the come one, come all open survey, or the employees, the top 4 remained the top 4. It was reliability, cost, environment, and then stewardship following behind that. So we've heard the community loud and clear. Those 4 things are the absolute most important, and then we'll figure weightings from there.
Thank you.
We also want to make sure with those updated definitions that those make sense, those are understandable and relatable to our customers. So we'll get a sense of that at the workshop as well.
Thank you.
You can go ahead and continue, please.
Sure.
Yeah. Next steps. So the next slide is our advertisement. This is for the public workshop, Wednesday the 29th, 6 p.m. at Library 21C. I have multiple copies of an Energy IRP frequently asked questions document right here that I can leave at the table, I guess, if that's allowed. That has the information of the workshop on it as well.
Could you also give one to our reporter from right behind you, from our local paper?
Okay. I have these right here. I'll make sure that I do that. Thank you very much. So, and then for each of the phase, we've had, each phase has had its own public process, basically. Each one has utilities, policy advisory committees, and UPAC meetings every month. Each phase has utilities board meetings twice where UPAC makes its recommendation, and the following month the board approves, makes changes or approves and gives direction on that. For phase 2, we have our website up. We have an existing email that we're receiving comment on the IRP or questions that people want to know, energyvision@csu.org. That's monitored daily. And all responses to that or questions to that email address are shared directly with both UPAC and the board. They see all the comment and input that we get. So here are just some key dates for this final phase. UPAC being on February 5th, the board on February 19th to receive UPAC's recommendation with approval on March 18th. And then looking ahead, we have our phase 3. Here are the UPAC dates, with June 3rd kind of being that culmination when UPAC will determine its final recommendation on our portfolio. The board meetings where they'll receive that recommendation and make its determination in June and July. We will be doing another public workshop. I haven't got the details completely ironed out on that yet, but that will be announced prior to the public workshop next week. We'll have the date and location for that next phase 3 public workshop in the May timeframe. The website stays the same. We will be going through another round of surveys. Each phase has its own survey. That survey will be run from March 15th to April 15th. And then again, that email stays the same. And that's what we have. Any questions on opportunities to engage? And of course, we'll be looking in phase 3 if the city would like to have us back to give you an update.
I have one comment, if I could, versus a question, and that is, I can't speak to the other attributes, but I know that there's a tremendous amount of interest in the environment in our community. So I'm very happy to see that it was weighted fairly highly, not highly enough, but fairly highly by the people who have contributed so far. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Quick comment is 1 of 7. I'd like to see her come back for phase 3.
We can start working on that date as soon as you'd like.
Okay. That said, thank you very much. That was
Thank
informative. Appreciate your interest. Council, does anyone want a break at this point? Okay, let's take a break.
You are.
I think there's coffee out there. You don't drink it.
It's called.
I heard that.
So you just, so you leave it off.
Hey, what's going on?
You bring it in, and then when you hear all the clicks, you display.
Yeah, it always gets warm in here, doesn't it? Oh, it does.
Just a pinch.
I gotta get this thing on.
Just a little bit, or everybody will get cold.
Oh, there it is. Right there. I knew there was something.
And then just push that little thing under there.
Oh yeah, sorry. Right, yeah. Appreciate that. Right. Yeah, that was like
Okay, let's get back to business. Over the recess, we had a request to take an item that was removed from the consent calendar and move down under business under H. The 2020 Mineral Springs Joint Funded Monitoring Agreement with U.S. Geological Survey that came up. Basically, we've got a couple things. There was a little discussion indicating that some of those answers that were requested. Let me back up. There was an email that was received this afternoon from Dave Wolverton. He had some questions about the survey. It seems reasonable that we should try and answer those questions. And the thought is that we could take, I'm sorry.
We do need to go ahead and try to answer some of those
Okay.
due to the contract and the dates. So I have spoken with both Jeff and Ann, and I think we can answer some of those questions at this time.
If it is all right with council, Jeff Jones has been at work since 7 o'clock this morning, and if we could address this and get it done, he'd be able to go home and get some sleep. So if council, we have a motion to address that, move that item in the agenda, address it now.
I move we make that item H1.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor? All right. Okay, so unanimous.
I'll go ahead and ask Jeff to come up. I will say, I believe Jeff is going to ask Ann to come up and answer some of the questions from the Mineral Springs Foundation. Jeff did not have, Rich normally manages this, and Rich is on vacation this week. So Jeff is filling in, and we're going to defer some to Ann.
In fact, we're going to defer most to Ann because she has the technical expertise on this.
So
we
Jones, could you come?
I'm sorry. Let me try this again. Jeff Jones, Public Works Director. So I'd like to say that I've spoken with Ann and Denise and Roy about this, as well as Jeff, our attorney. And some of the information I'm not privy to that I don't know, just for the fact that I got the information that was needed just recently. And to make sure we answer some of the questions properly for the Honorable Council up here, we want to let Ann answer some of those because she does have some technical information about that. Which I'll defer to Ann, who's much smarter than I am.
And Nichols, I'm the treasurer of the Mineral Springs Foundation. And I haven't actually looked at the questions in great detail. My impression is that they're actually very detailed. We had the Mineral Springs Foundation had a presentation from USGS from a gentleman named Connor Newman, who explained what they've been doing. And the previous council, I think, was briefed on kind of the 3-year approach that we're taking with USGS to first collect data, then to analyze the data, and then to produce a model of the aquifer. And all of this was initiated basically by Dave Wolverton before he left the board. And I think it is an excellent approach, because what we've had in the past is sort of a volunteer effort to collect the data, and that hasn't worked perfectly. And it's really important, if you're going to get good data that can be analyzed to produce a model of the aquifer, that you have reliable data. When USGS first started, what they realized was that a lot of the batteries in the devices, the transducers that transmit this data in the springs, were dead. Some of the devices didn't work. They've spent a number of months trying to get the devices to work, and have actually just come up with the recommendation that we probably need to replace some of the equipment. The Mineral Springs Foundation is going to be discussing that Thursday. And I think it's imperative that we had started this process in July of last year, which was already a kind of delay from what we had intended to have collected for the entire year of 2019. So we're a little behind anyway, and we're a little behind getting this joint funding agreement executed for 2020. And they have been working without an agreement. I think they won't continue to do that. So I think it's important to get it executed. The detailed questions that Dave has, what I would suggest is that we get them submitted to Connor Newman, and he will respond, I think, promptly. I can't answer some of them. The fact that we do know that some of the data that the delay in the data collection is due to the fact that when they got here, they recognized that a lot of the equipment simply wasn't functional, and we needed to address that issue. So that would be my suggestion, is it's important to keep this process moving, I think. And to do so, I think the USGS probably is not going to continue to work without an agreement. And the questions that Dave asked are good questions and could be easily answered by their hydrologist, because they're kind of technical questions. And while I would be happy to try to answer them, I think it would be far better to go that way. And would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, as liaison to the Mineral Springs Foundation Board for 2 years, the last 2 years, an outstanding group, outstanding foundation. I would highly support your position on this and have USGS answer these questions. And move along with the contract, to your point, very much so.
Is that a motion?
I'd be glad to turn it into a motion, but if Councilman Shade is not the liaison.
No, that's fine, as long as we have a way of getting Dave's questions kind of addressed.
So, Mr. Mayor, would you be amenable to a motion? Yeah. I move we approve the contract as proposed, with the understanding that Dave Wolverton's questions will be answered by USGS in due time.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Is that adequate to cover Dave Wolverton's questions, you feel?
But that was my question. Well, I understand that Dave Wolverton sent an email with concerns.
Yeah.
I haven't, I didn't know if we should discuss that before. If that email has anything to do with this motion, I would prefer to talk about the email and see what the responses are, and then do the motion. But I don't know if that's.
You can discuss after the second is made, so this is a good time to have that conversation.
There's a copy of Dave's email.
I second that, get it rolling.
Okay.
So that's already been seconded.
So the intent here is that it's going to take a little while to get to the answer. So this will be approved by USGS. And then we approve this and we go ahead and get the funding rolling and keep the lights on, basically. And nonetheless, responsibly answer Mr. Wolverton's concerns.
How do we have two lights up there? Isn't there like a central turn it off thing? Oh. Because John is still on.
Maybe we're not glitches.
Maybe we should have ground control.
Download.
One second. This was intended to be the Comic Central hour. Each council person has a switch, and then I have a master switch that I'm supposed to throw after everybody votes, and we all do it in sync, and then just get used to this. So my apologies. If you want to laugh, I'm glad to be here. Okay, so we've got a motion, we've got a second?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Okay. We've actually got, I've got 3 sets of switches here, so if you want. Run home. Jeff, I think we're done there, so you want to go home and get some sleep?
I do.
Or if you want to stay here and get laughs, that's good.
I've been here many times.
Okay.
But I do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nichols, that's very helpful. Okay, back to schedule. Okay, the next item of business, H1. This is what a lot of you are here for. This is first reading of ordinance 2719 and the ordinance amending section 3.12.120 of the Manitou Springs Municipal Code to increase the sales tax rate from 3.6% to 3.9% and to increase the use tax rate from 3.5% to 3.8%. And adding a new chapter 3.51 to the Manitou Springs Municipal Code to create a new special facilities and arts fund for the allocation of certain sales and use tax revenue assessed pursuant to Manitou Springs 2019 ballot issue 2D. And first, Mr. Parker, if you could perhaps address the changes that have occurred between the version we're seeing tonight and what we had, or what the council had on in December.
Yes, I could actually. So what's, I should actually grab my red line version there. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to look at the actual small differences. Let me just quickly, Judy sent me a version. All right, just give me 1 minute here. I have the differences. I can talk about everything off the top of my head except for the differences. Give me just 1 second while I get that. Okay. So, at your, I think it was your work session last week, direction was given to basically put the ordinance that basically imposes the sales tax and the use tax, the increases, back on the agenda for approval after the voters approve the actual ballot measures. At the work session, I was asked to change. Gosh, I'm sorry, I'm going to pull it up here. I got the version from Judy. I got it right here. Sorry, it shows the actual revisions that I didn't have. The only changes that we have here is making the effective date of the actual tax July 1st, 2020, because that's when the state can actually implement its collections. The state is collecting on behalf of Manitou Springs, so they don't change their collection scheme other than January 1 or July 1st, beginning of the year or mid-year. So now the change is for July 1 when the state can begin collections. So there's been a couple of changes to that in the code. And then actually that's really it. And then the effective date of approval is now 5 days pursuant to your charter. Before it was going to be effective once it was actually approved. So we didn't know it was going to be approved or not, the December version, and it actually was passed by the voters after a recount. So the effective date now is 5 days after being passed. That's it.
I move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I have 2 broad areas of discussion. The first area is very simple. It's this ordinance will be in effect for a period of 15 years. And as we discussed with the initial item on the Crystal Park Road, when councils look back at the record, I think it's very important that the record be as clear as possible. So therefore I have just a couple of suggested adjustments, which is on page 1 of the ordinance, the 4th whereas, I would like to suggest that we state, whereas ballot measure 2D was approved by a 1,035 to 1,030 majority of the 3,851 electors of the city. So in other words, future councils will be able to look at this and understand what exactly was the majority. And it's great in Manitou Springs. We've had multiple elections now at the mayoral level with ballot measures where things have been very close. And when I think they're very close, we owe it as our legacy to future councils to let them understand that was the environment we were working in. So that would be one of my requested changes. That's the most material one. This is an administrative question. Given that this is a new council, new mayor, that's another change, etc. Would this ordinance not be numerated as being an ordinance of 2020 as opposed to an ordinance of 2019? That's just kind of a technical question. I know at some point we start our renumbering every year.
I did think about that and about changing the numbering. My concern was that it captured the history, you know, that this was before council, and sometimes if people are looking for that ordinance number, and if it gets changed, that could have been a problem. So, because it started in 2019, I did keep it with the 2019 number.
I would be swayed that way, given your careful thought, because that does, again, to my point of why the majority and the number of electors who voted is important. Same concept. Thank you. So I would draw that. And then I have one question that I think we all understand, which is on section 3.51.050, the last page. Procedures for accounting obviously lies with city staff. The second term, and administration, the way I see it, part of the administration absolutely is delegated to the city administrator and the finance director. Part of the administration stays with council consistent with 3.51.030. All expenditures from special facilities arts fund must be authorized by council. I was looking for another word other than administration, but I frankly couldn't come up with one.
You know, this basically mirrors other language we have in other provisions dealing with special funds. It's absolutely fine if you wanted to change or you can get rid of an administration, but it was supposed to be more just procedures versus actual approval of expending funds. So I don't think it's really vital language one way or the other. If you're less comfortable with it, you can always just remove the administration portion.
Yeah, I just wanted to have that visible for discussion. I'm not, because I don't have a better way other than.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Frankly, it just came from similar language you use in your code for other funds as well. I don't think it's necessary if you want to move an administration out of that.
If it's similar and understood, I can see reading it as is. I'll come back to the material point then, strictly whereas. And so what I would ask is those who made the motion, would you be open to that friendly amendment?
I'm sorry, I'm not clear what you want changed.
Yes. Page 1, the fourth whereas, I'll read it. All I'm doing is inserting numbers. Okay. Whereas ballot issue 2D was approved by a 1,035 to 1,030 majority of the 3,851 eligible electors of the city.
I would object to that.
I also object.
We don't put that in any of our ordinances, what the vote was or anything like that. I don't see why that should go in there. I would really object to that.
I also don't understand the relevance of adding that for the same reason, that it was approved by a majority of the eligible electors of the city.
Yeah, my only reason for doing it is on the historical look back 10 years from now.
Yeah, but this isn't a historical document.
I guess, Bob, procedurally, since you're not going to get a friendly amendment to it, I guess I suggest you just make a motion to amend it and us deal with it that way. Because obviously.
There's a motion on the floor in a second, so we need to vote on that unless you withdraw your motion.
No objection.
I'll let that one rest where it rests. I said I had two comments. The second family of comments, and this is very simple, is we had a great work session last week. And in that work session, we not only had just a really good debate about acting on this evening, which, as I said, I was in favor of us acting on it this evening, but we also discussed what I would call the bones of the implementation. And those were very well documented in the consent calendar when we discussed that last week here. So can't bring that topic up in detail, but what I'd like to suggest is that between now and the second reading, I would like to have a resolution that kind of captures the intent of the work session in terms of the work plan. So this would basically be a first pass roadmap as to what we're going to do relative to implementation, so that as we approve the ordinance second reading, we have a compendium document, a resolution that says, now here's the bare bones of that work plan. Because the two, in my opinion, come together. We're talking about collecting money here, very light on the implementation. It would be good to know, here's the sources of money, we've identified those, and how they're going to be expended. So this resolution, I would be able to present at next week's work session. It would only have 3 key points to it. It would be that we're going to establish 3 citizen advisory groups to help us with the pieces that we've talked about in the work session. Those are the capital projects of city-owned facilities. Those are the 15th. So we have a date in mind. So this is a bit of a structure, and it's a date. It's making visible to the community what we're going to do as our next step. So relative to my vote, I saw that momentum in the work session. I would like us to, not as part of this motion, but just generally recognize that we can have that as an item on the work session next week of draft resolution that comes in parallel with the final ordinance approval. So they're just stating that, and like us to generally go in that direction. And this has my support with that understanding.
Mr. Todd, I think it's laudable that there's a plan. I think probably, okay, we'll get used to this. And I think it's laudable to have a plan and so forth going forward. However, I don't think that's really what we're up against tonight. I think we really want to address the ordinance. Do we want to pass it or not? I will also mention that we've got some pretty heavily loaded work sessions coming up, so finding a slot for discussion of this is going to be a little bit tricky. I'm looking at the calendar, I think probably February the 4th, which is a regular session. We would have a little time there. The agenda is otherwise short enough to where we could spend some time working on this. That would be my thought. But again, I personally don't want to bog down in implementation details tonight.
Mr. Mayor, that sounds perfectly fine. Whether I present that draft board or resolution at the work session on February 4th, it's not sense to me. I'll get it out early and we'll get it out on February 4th. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Thanks. I also was a little surprised, maybe it's just a procedural thing, not to see any attachments in here about notes from our work session last week, because that doesn't really tell the public in a public document, doesn't put those details, and that's not complaining about anybody or arguing, but this was a close vote. And when you don't do that, then 1,030 people don't have those details. They don't have them written down, and you don't see them. And I don't like that. And so if I don't see that for the second reading, I'm going to be pretty disappointed. I'm also not happy with the rushing of this because that puts pressure on staff. They're already really busy to do that, and perhaps pressure on the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem too to do it. So again, I've always said from the get-go that we need to acknowledge this close vote, and we need to do that by being very clear about what our processes are going to be and what we're doing in these, what we discussed in our work session, how we're going to move forward. So again, I just was surprised to bring this up and see only that document as part of what the public saw, as part of what I saw. There wasn't notes from our work session where we talked about how we were going to appoint a special committee. So that's just something that I think that this community needs to see. I think, it'd be great to see as many people here for match as we saw for the Crystal Park Road, and to have seen that all the way through. And I'm worried, as I said last week, about not having more clarity and transparency moving forward. So that's a concern for me tonight, and certainly a concern for second reading. So I think a couple of things to mention tonight for me before we make this vote is that John Spears and I had a spirited conversation last week after the meeting. I think we made some progress in that conversation. We ended up talking about fostering animals. That's great news, I'm sure. And we talked a little bit about something that I heard often through this match process, especially regarding the library expansion, which was the work is already done. It's already done. We did this work several years ago. We had community engagement. We had 80 people come to meetings. We decided what to do, and it's already done. And I just get stuck on that for a number of reasons. One is that if the Cliff House waltzed in here tonight and said we're ready to move forward on Cliff House West, we did all the work years ago. Here's our paperwork. Wow, we want to move forward. I don't think that anybody on any of our commissions in our community and us would be really thrilled to see that, or maybe even get an agreement with it, no matter how you feel about it. Last year, recently, we told a development group that was private that they wanted a 3-year, extension to move forward, and we said a 1.5 years. You get a 1.5 years with these plans. And that's because things change. Things have changed since we did that work. Things are going to change. They're rapidly changing. And John and I talked briefly, I couldn't remember the name of the book, but it's such a great name. And it's Thank You for Being Late by Thomas L. Friedman. It talks about 2007 and how many things changed our world in 2007. And I'm just going to be brief, but iPhone, Twitter, Airbnb, that was the year it launched. And the whole world changed. And the question tonight isn't whether libraries are going to be relevant in the future. That's not the question that we're trying to answer, because I think we know that they are, and we probably all agree on that. The question is, in the grand scheme of all the capital needs that Manitou Springs has, where does that library expansion fit in? And that's the part that 3 to 4 members of the previous council didn't agree on. What we didn't agree on was that we needed to have this robust process to talk about what all of our city needs are. And then we needed to rank and prioritize them. And we needed to see how things fell out. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. And I have, so be quiet soon. But at any rate, Thank You for Being Late. It's called An Optimist Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. We have a lot of changes, and we need to be looking at that as we move forward with this. And again, the community, we have this opportunity. We can either stick our feet in and go, we won, and it's going to be like this, and that's certainly a way to go. But I'd really like to see us be more transparent and more clear and work really super hard between now and the date that this goes into effect to really lend some structure and understanding to this entire community about how this moves forward. Because I'm just not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. I don't see it tonight. I don't see it in the packet. And that bothers me moving forward. Thanks.
Can I make one comment in response? Just briefly, I don't want to go into the whole thing. But the ordinance does not require a dime to be spent on a library. And if money is spent on a library, it doesn't require that it be expanded. So that might happen, that might not happen, but if you think expansion is a good thing or a bad thing, or it should wait, or it's not the top priority, that's something that we can deliberate when the special committees advise us on what they think we should do. But I don't want the public to think that this says you have to use this money to expand the library. That was a misunderstanding. I think that was a poor public announcement when this thing came out. Everybody thought it meant, oh, the library's going to get expanded, but that's not what it says. So it just says that we can spend money at the library if we want for facility improvement and or operations. So we haven't gotten there yet. So you might still get your way with what you think about the library.
Really getting my way, and I appreciate your comments, and it's always a good reminder, and I appreciate that. My comment is, a lot of people think a lot of things about match that may or may not happen, and if we fail to have the communications and really give a detailed plan and really hit those things, I mean, I think there's a lot of people in this room that would be really upset if we never spent that money. And maybe there's a few people who might be happy, but I just, it's a really uneasy feeling, and my unease with this from day one was that we didn't prioritize our capital needs. And granted, we had a lot of transition, we were without a city administrator permanently, we were going through so many hard hurdles, and we didn't do it. But I guess I feel like we've got to be more specific going forward. Not that we have to even take a stand on something, but we have to really get the community really specific information on how we're moving forward on this. And so I agree with you 100%. But I also think we lack, the communications have been bad. And I don't want to see us keep doing that, because I think that divides our community, which is divided on this issue. There's no question about it. No question about majority rules, but there's no question that it's a slim majority and we're really divided, and that's not going to serve us well if we can't start really having some really clear, robust community engagement and really clear communication about what we really can do. Because I think that's what surprised everyone when council voted against the implementation of this ordinance, because we could do that, and if we had communicated better, that wouldn't have come as such a shock either. Thank you.
I just have one quick thing. That is, I completely agree with that communication. And I think that's been hugely problematic through the entire process. I would also say that normally we don't take minutes, or the clerk does not take minutes during work sessions, but Judy did last week. And I always read the minutes, and it's always a struggle for me because I like really, detailed minutes, and that's not typically what's done. So I can see with your frustration with last week's minutes, but it is in there. The framework was published in there, and the minutes were published in there. It might not have been, and that I'm guessing that we may still have that discussion when we discuss January 14th minutes. But I want to just thank you for taking the minutes and including them from last week.
Thanks for that clarification.
Susan, as the maker of the motion to pass this, I totally agree with you about the council and the community needs to get its act together in terms of our capital needs. What I would like, the reason why I want this ordinance passed is I want to get this funding flow in place. Okay? However it happened back in December that this didn't get in place, now we're $200,000 down for it. And I want to make sure that we get this funding in place and we do what you're talking about. But thank you for bringing that.
Anyone else, any further comments? So, help me understand, we've got a motion, we've got a second. We have a proposed amendment, we didn't take that.
Bob's gonna bring a resolution to a future meeting. I guess I call the question, let's vote.
Okay.
This is just first reading.
This is first reading. We, at council's pleasure, if you want, we could entertain. Oh, sorry. This is known as a pitcock, what I just did here.
Yours, okay.
Okay,
but I didn't know we were
Okay, so motion passes unanimously. We'll go ahead and start collecting the tax July 1st, and we'll have money next.
See you at our regular meeting next.
Okay, so now the really hard work begins. We have to figure out how to spend this money judiciously and to try and make as much peace in the community, get as much buy-in from everybody. So that sounds simple, doesn't it?
We still can pass it on second reading, but assuming that's okay.
Still optimistic.
You're ahead of your game.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. Okay, next item is resolution numbers. Okay, go ahead, anyone who'd like to bail out. Thanks for your attention and time. Please stay interested, we're going to need help.
Oh, don't you worry about that.
Next item is resolution number 0820, the resolution appointing staff members to a board and alternate members on the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments Transportation Advisory Committee. And basically this is an effort to appoint our city engineer, Dole Grebnick, to the Transportation Advisory Board with Jeff Jones, Public Works Director, as his backup.
I move we approve resolution number 0820, resolution appointing staff member to board and alternate member on the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments Transportation Advisory Committee, and authorize Mayor Graham to sign the letter of appointment addressed to PPACG Executive Director Andrew Jones.
I second.
Any discussion?
I just need a clarification. Did you say Roy? Because Roy it's Roy and Jeff.
Excuse
Jeff
me,
is
that's,
the alternate, but Roy, is that what you said? I'm sorry.
no, I think I said Dole, excuse me, my apologies.
Okay.
And my motion was simply to approve the resolution.
Okay, great. Then we're set. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, any further discussion? No?
Who did the second?
Yeah. You seconded? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's vote. Yeah, this kind of reminds me of those tests psychologists use on monkeys. Trying to buck up so I can get to the monkeys. Thanks for your patience.
You get a banana at the end.
Such a deal. Okay, let's see. Item H4, that's the consideration approval of the January 14th, 2020 work session minutes.
I move approval.
It was pulled off the consent calendar.
So I'm assuming there's discussion on it, so.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, the item was pulled off the consent calendar.
Right. So may I begin the discussion? The number one, I want to reinforce what Nancy shared about the timeliness of these minutes. Ms. Morgan, it's great after 4 years in council to have the clerk's office provide minutes of the prior meeting. Right, then, we've been at times 6 weeks in arrear on our minutes. Timeliness is fantastic, so thank you. And for going the extra mile on this one, unusual is noted a work session, but it was an important work session. I have 4 adds to Exhibit B of these minutes. You would recall in the work session, we began with questions that were very well put together by the Mayor Pro Tem. We started our discussion. So we started discussing points that we wanted to have included in the implementation. And then we went to kind of a third section saying, well, let's start putting these things up on a flip chart. But there was a gap there where we didn't record a few key points. So these key points I would like to also see placed on Exhibit B. I would have emailed these over the holiday weekend, but I empathize with staff coming back after a 3-day break and finding stuff in their email to turn around before council meetings. So I defer to just do it tonight. Here's the 4 items. Number 1, we talked about having an implementation plan. Maybe it won't be perfect, but at least a first pass of it in front of council by April 15th.
You talked about that, but I don't think anyone else talked about that.
Well, I think the purpose of the meeting was to get our points on the board for discussion. So I respectfully request that be added. Let me just finish what the points were. Another point was to compare I'll simplify the term arts tax to what's euphemistically considered up in Denver, the Denver art tax. It has the same broad objectives. In fact, the MAC committee modeled their work after that. But I think it's important for us to look at that and know the history of that. It's been around now, I think, 15 years. It's been ratified by the voters. I know just this last election, I think it was for the 3rd time. So there's a great model in the state that I think we should be looking at. We also talked about establishing the 3 advisory boards that I previously mentioned, so I won't repeat that. I discussed offline with the city administrator since that meeting about the appropriateness of that, having a capital advisory group within our portfolio of things we're doing financially. Subject to details being worked out, the city administrator thinks that's a discussion we should have. And then the last item is to highlight with these city-owned facilities, it needs to be understood they need to go through the planning commission's major developments, and it needs to be understood that we need to have community meetings on big projects like this to understand what is the range of capital and what does that capital buy, so we can make a determination of, using the library as an example, are we going to do a $3.5 million renovation there, or are we going to do, as John Shada suggested, the ADA immediately, and then in between things, how much of a renovation, how much of an expansion? You really have to have that in the community forum, because that's the only place where we can get that calibration of the library 50% expanded, 100% expanded. So those were the points I respectfully asked that they be memorialized as part of Exhibit B, and then I'm absolutely
Can I
fine.
make one comment on that? Oh, do you have more? I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
Okay, yeah, I would have no problem adding those as additional recommendations, but they weren't agreed to. But it's just part of the discussion.
Which is what Exhibit B
Right,
is.
I just wanted to clarify that, yeah. So I guess that would be a friendly amendment if John
before making this motion. Councilman Shader. So,
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Talked about those.
Sure, if Bob wants to have some clarification that he made those comments and put those in the minutes, that's fine with me.
City Clerk, is that
So,
stated clearly
what
enough?
I'm hearing is that you want to amend, to approve the minutes with those changes reflected.
Exactly,
on the exhibit.
exactly. And I don't know whether you need to go back and review that, or whether what Bob's suggesting is enough clarification for him.
I think you can.
Okay, all right.
Motion.
In a second.
Vote.
Very unanimous evening.
Good.
Enjoy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now, we got item I, receive or act on council correspondence. Councilman Todd?
Yes, I have two items. They both, Mr. Cheney, fit in your zone. They're both planning / public works items. Council received a note from a resident in Pilot Knob regarding the inability to park in front of their house due to a telephone pole. That resident has not received a response. And this is kind of a broader topic for just a moment. At times, council gets, an all council email, and I think we've seen once in a while one of us will respond to it, and we'll blind copy others so that they know what's happened. Sometimes those notes are really staff centric, and it's it's who answers it first or who should answer it. But maybe using that as an example, that probably was an example where if someone on staff had responded to that citizen in blind copy council, we would know it was taken care of. This is all part of his job, set our learning curve together. But anyway, back to that one, I think that falls in staff's camp, if you agree with that.
Yes.
And then the other resident call I got was having to do with a new build in the Ruston Avenue area. I do understand that citizen met with our public services director today to get some clarification on that issue. So that's great, but I do want to draw that to your attention, Roy, because it's a fairly high profile situation.
Yes.
That's probably it.
I know about that one.
Thank you. Great. I thought perhaps you would.
I don't have any correspondence tonight.
Two things. One, I went to the URA meeting in my role as a liaison, and I think probably the major thing that came out of that is they're about to sign a snow plowing contract to do the sidewalks in the URA because they had so much trouble with the last snowfall. It was just horribly iced up. So that's an interesting development. And two is with Pac-Man, which for those of you who are new, that's the Pedestrian and Cycle Manitou advisory group, has put together a draft ordinance for bike share program and a draft pilot program implementation plan for a bike program, and would like to hand that off to staff for finalization, given that that's a big component of the mobility study and any number of other things, in addition to the fact that there is someone in the URA who's talking about putting in a bike share business in addition to putting in the bike share station that the URA is doing. So there may be a need to get that in sooner rather than later so that we have it covered. So anyway, we've got Natalie will bring over the draft Okay.
to, probably tomorrow, actually.
Okay,
All right.
so, that's all. Thank you.
Nothing really?
Nothing?
I got Mike out with in terms of Dave's, Mineral Springs issues.
The Transportation and Parking Board got a note today advising them that, Roy is gonna be their newly, staff liaison. That's a change from Michelle Anthony. So that's kind of a big change and, big news for this coming year. That's it.
Okay, next item, city administrators report.
So the only thing I have to report tonight is that we're continuing to work on the SP Plus contract, and we're looking at doing the 1 year, but we have it modified for a 30-day out. So if we decide we're gonna break from them to use somebody else, then we have 30 days we can get out of that contract. It used to be 60 days, so. But for the meantime, it looks like using them for the year is probably more realistic, but we're gonna need them, so. That's all I have. Yes, ma'am.
Clarification, so does that mean it's a 1-year contract, but as long as they give 30 days notice, we give 30 days notice, we can get out?
Correct. So if we decide, June that we want to move on, then we can just give them 30 days notice. Yes, ma'am. That's all I have.
So I just have a couple of things. I do want to congratulate the chief. He passed his test today, which was required with a high percentage, so I want to congratulate him. And he is now officially a Colorado.
50%.
Okay, 50% done. So you passed the written test, so congratulations to him. I've been spending a lot of time just meeting with individuals in the community. That's probably what the majority of my time has been for the last couple of weeks. And going through those things, working on getting the KPIs on the website. Hope to have those done. We met last week as department heads and identified them, so we're hoping to get those live fairly soon once we get everything going with Open Jobs. And then the work plan did get on the website, and I received a couple of emails saying, good job from citizens, so that was nice to hear.
What's KPI?
So key performance indicators.
Okay, that takes us to item K, executive session. So we're going to go into an executive session.